Sometimes the loudest voice in the room is not the wisest. Wisdom often arrives quietly, soft-footed and gentle, amid tension, misunderstanding, and pride. When anger threatens to decide our future, there is a kind of bravery that does not fight, but listens, intercedes, and leans into humility. If you've ever been caught between your convictions and your conscience, let the story of Abigail show you another way. Tonight, as we open the ancient scrolls, you'll hear of a woman who stepped between vengeance and disaster, not by force, but by grace. In this quiet moment, listen to how faith and discernment can transform conflict, how one humble act can change the course of a king, and perhaps the course of your own heart. Let's walk into the hills of Carmel, into a season of deep unrest, and witness 7 bridges of wisdom from Abigail's intervention with David in 1 Samuel 25. 1. Godly discernment begins in listening, not reacting. Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 seahs of parched grain, and went after them. 1 Samuel 25:18 ESV para. Abigail's husband Nabal had just insulted David, a warrior on the run, a future king. David's response was swift and dangerous. He gathered his men to wipe out Nabal's entire household. In most biblical stories of conflict, we hear the clash of voices and the stampede of rash decisions. But Abigail listened first. She listened to a servant's plea. She measured the danger, the pain, and the possibility. To discern the heart of God in a crisis, we must begin by listening deeply to God, to others, and to the truth of the moment, not our initial feelings. Before she ever opened her mouth to speak, Abigail opened her heart to the reality before her. She did not answer pride with pride or reflex with reflex. Ask yourself, when did you last pause to truly listen, setting aside assumptions or wounded ego? How often do you react when what is needed, first and foremost, is humble attention? 2. True courage chooses peace over preservation. And Abigail hurried and came to David, and she fell at his feet and said, "On me alone, my lord, be the guilt." 1 Samuel 25:23-24. Abigail could have hidden. She had every reason to shrink away. Her husband's offense was not her own. She owed David nothing. Yet she risked everything, her safety, her status, her dignity, in order to stand in the gap between anger and innocent lives. Peacemaking in a biblical sense is not passive. It is courage in the most vulnerable form. Abigail's intervention was costly and exposed her to danger, not only from David, but from Nabal's wrath. Godly courage may call us to step into conflicts we did not start, to advocate for those who cannot speak, to lay down our need to control the outcome for the sake of what is right. What holds you back from peacemaking today? Is it fear of conflict, desire for comfort, or uncertainty about being misunderstood? Real courage is shown not in loud gestures, but in quiet obedience to the call of righteousness. 3. Humility is the pathway to influence. She fell at his feet and said, "Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant." 1 Samuel 25:24. In her approach, Abigail models humility remarkable for her station. An honored wife of a wealthy landowner bows, literally and spiritually, before a man who has every right to be angry but no current power or title. She does not demand David's attention or attempt to manipulate him. She appeals, she bows, and she speaks words laden with respect. Scripture consistently upholds humility as the soil where God plants wisdom and favor. James 4:6 echoes, God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. In all leadership, authority, or influence, whether in family, community, or church, humility is the only posture from which true wisdom flows. Consider, where might quiet humility soften hard hearts in your own conflicts? What would it look like for you to approach someone, not in defense of your own honor, but in service to theirs? 4. Wise speech knows both truth and timing. Please forgive the trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord. 1 Samuel 25:28. Abigail's words are not random. They are wise, strategic, and full of spiritual insight. She acknowledges David's pain, affirms his calling, and reminds him gently of his higher purpose. In this moment, she bridges the chasm between personal grievance and God's greater design. Notice, too, she speaks not only what is true, but what is timely. She does not confront David in the first heat of his anger, but meets him along the way, giving space for reason. Her words are at once honest, hopeful, and redirecting. What does your speech do in moments of crisis? Does it escalate, accuse, or wander? Or do you, like Abigail, seek the wisdom of when and how to speak, measuring every word as a tool for building peace, not simply venting frustration? The book of Proverbs reminds us, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in a setting of silver. Proverbs 25:11. May your voice in conflict become soft bread, nourishing honesty rather than harshness. 5. Remembering God's bigger story diffuses immediate anger. When the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience, for having shed blood without cause. 1 Samuel 25:30-31 para. Abigail's wisdom reaches its peak here. She gently reminds David of what really matters, not the grievance before him, but the calling beyond it. She anchors his identity not in his wounded pride, but in the promises of God. She asks, when you are king, do you want this burden on your conscience? So much anger in our lives is fueled by forgetting the greater story God is writing. Anxieties escalate, grudges harden, and we lose sight of who and whose we are. Abigail calls all who listen to remember, vengeance is not ours, and our future is too precious to spoil with impulsive bloodshed or harsh words. When next you feel the heat of anger, can you step back and see your story from heaven's vantage point? Can you recall God's purposes for you and leave outrage in his hands, not your own? 6. Intercession can change outcomes for others and for ourselves. Please forgive the transgression. Let this present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. 1 Samuel 25:27. Abigail is a living parable of intercession, taking upon herself the consequences of another's sin and making peace where none seemed possible. She offers not just words, but tangible gifts of bread, wine, meat, and sustenance for David's men. Her generosity, her quick action, and her willingness to stand in the breach transform the course of the story. In a sense, Abigail mirrors what Christ himself would later fulfill perfectly, interceding, pleading mercy where judgment was due, offering himself as the bridge between wrath and grace. Intercessory prayer, reconciliatory action, and even practical hospitality become, for the Christian, powerful tools in peacemaking. Where might you be called to intercede for the hurting, for the hostile, or even for those whose choices you do not control? How could you become an Abigail for someone today, not by fixing every problem, but by humbly carrying grace where it is least deserved? 7. God honors quiet wisdom. Others may not, but God does. And David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, surely by morning there had not been left to Nabal so much as one male." Then David received from her hand what she had brought him, and he said to her, "Go up in peace to your house." 1 Samuel 25, 32-35, para. Abigail acted quietly, wisely, beneath the gaze of those who might never understand. Her husband did not appreciate her actions. When told later, his heart failed him. But God's hand moved. David's vengeance was stopped, innocent blood spared, and a future king blessed. The final witness of Abigail's story is not fame or applause. It is the blessing of God upon a woman who risked doing good in a difficult, thankless place. God honors those who walk humbly and act wisely, even when earthly reward seems unlikely or unseen. Do not measure your spiritual courage or wisdom by others' responses. The God who sees and knows will reward what is done in secret, and he will honor those who pursue peace, even in the valley of unspoken cost. It is here in the quiet aftermath that we see the paradox. A woman, uncrowned and outnumbered, shapes the legacy of kings. She is not the loudest in the room, but her wisdom echoes long after swords would have fallen. Pause and ask, are you willing to be quietly wise, even when no one applauds? Abigail's story is a bridge, a sacred meeting point between human frailty and divine intention. Her actions remind us that the most lasting victories may be won not by might, but by mercy. Not through argument, but by intercession. Not by seizing honor, but by laying it down. Think of the conflicts you carry, the relationships in tension, the anger that sometimes rises unbidden. What would change if you let wisdom, not impulse, lead? What if you risked humility where pride wants to reign? What if your prayer became, like Abigail's, a quiet offering at the feet of others and at the feet of Christ? Let this truth settle in your soul. In God's kingdom, the meek are powerful and the peacemakers are called sons and daughters. Before you move on with your evening, linger for a moment here. Reflect. Where is God calling you to step in, quietly, courageously, wisely, on behalf of others? What resentment, what tendency to vengeance is he inviting you to lay down? Can you see how he might use your small, humble acts to change the course of a story? Perhaps tonight, your greatest act of courage will be to pray for someone you find difficult to love. Perhaps your wisdom will be giving up the last word or listening where you'd rather speak. Perhaps, like Abigail, you will choose to stand in the gap, asking God to do, through your humility, what pride never could accomplish. You are never too small, too overlooked, or too outmatched for God to use you as a vessel of his peace. If this story has gently challenged you, if Abigail's wisdom has shone a holy light on places you are called to reconcile, let that light continue in your thoughts and in your prayers tonight. Would you pause in this moment and whisper your own willingness before God? Lord, Let me be quiet in wisdom, bold in grace, and humble in all peacemaking. If you wish, share in the comments how God has spoken to you, or where you long to see his peace at work. Subscribe for more sacred journeys into Scripture, and join this community of fellow pilgrims seeking God's daily wisdom. May the Lord bless you, keep you, and turn his face of peace toward you. May he give you the courage to intervene with grace, the discernment to listen before you act, and the blessing of humility that outlasts every conflict. Go quietly, go wisely, go in peace.